Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back on air with our first Keys webinar of the year. I think we have people connected from more than 80 countries today, so I'm really very excited, very happy to have you all here, and I love this feeling of global connection. And what we're going to talk about today is the day after tomorrow. We will reflect together on what we should expect in the medium term and how we can prepare for what is coming in order to be one step ahead in our thinking and in our decision making. As usual, we will be bringing together a selection of fresh insights from recent research that we've conducted around the world, and also some sort of local touch. So looking at the agenda, first of all, in New Year, New Optimism, Simon will examine the current public mood, and he will tell us about a bit of optimism that we're feeling in the air, which is good after a difficult year. Then Sarah will help us think about how we shape the future for our businesses and our societies, and she will share for this a perspective on what 2025 might actually look like. We will then dive into the dynamic reality of rural India with the 5 consumer truths presented by Pallavi, who will be joining us, or who has joined us already from Mumbai. And finally, Rich, who is today in Florida, will offer us a glimpse of how artificial intelligence can help us to be smarter in our search for stronger insights as we shape this future in front of us. And with that, Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this session. And before we go into the day after tomorrow, I should say, we thought we might spend a moment just looking at the today and thinking about how people feel at the start of the year, what their mood is, and perhaps to take the temperature out there before we then move on to look ahead. And in terms of taking the temperature, what I thought we might start with was our predictions survey. Every year we ask people around the world to look back at the 12 months just gone and look ahead at the year that lies before them. And what we've found for this particular wave of the research, in the wake of everything that we've seen with the coronavirus crisis, is that 70% of people describe 2020 as having been a bad year for me and my family, and certainly that's at the higher end of our spectrum that we found in recent years. So many people were pleased to see the back, of course, of 2020, and when they think about their country, that figure goes as high as 90%, saying that the year was a bad one for their country. And again, that level is rather higher than our normal set of expectations have been in previous years. So we're pleased to say goodbye to 2020. Some optimism, as Jennifer mentioned, around 2021, that the year will be better for me than it was in 2020. No more optimistic than normal. And it perhaps serves as a little bit of a reminder that I think we're going into the year in realistic mode. Yes, people think the global economy may be stronger in 2021, but we're expecting to see those visible signs of disruption, wearing a mask in public places, for example, in place for quite some time. We're on balance thinking it's unlikely things will have got back to normal this year. And Sarah will pick up on this in the next presentation as we look ahead, but certainly the prevailing mood is that we think it's unlikely the world will perhaps learn the lessons, if we may call them that, and change for the better as a result of the pandemic. And I think the backdrop to this, let's say, realistic assessment of where we are can be found in our regular What Worries the World study. We're finding that concern is at its highest level now since May 2020. It's been consistently the top of the leaderboard when we ask people which topics are most worrying in their country. And when we dive down to those latest results that we've just released and look at the top 10 countries that are most worried about coronavirus, we can see that they are in every continent of the world. It truly is something which is on the, let's say, top of the agenda, absolutely everywhere, including, for example, this month in Japan. due to host, of course, the Summer Olympics in July this year, which is the most worried country this month, along with Malaysia. And I think one of the things that's underlined once we start to look and unpick the dynamics of all of this is that this isn't a crisis that's affecting other people in my country or that's affecting the government of my country. It's affecting all of us. And this is very clear when we look at some of the regular data that we've been collecting. We're worried about what it may mean for our own ability to pay our bills or for example, for our job security. But we're also worried that we personally will be diagnosed with COVID-19. And if I draw your eye to the bottom of the chart, it just serves, I think, as a reminder that this has been going on for such a long period of time, that there's this level of concern, this threat, if you like, not just to our daily lives, but to our health of ourselves and of course, our families. And that perhaps helps shape one of the reasons why we're finding attitudes to the vaccines to be moving quite fast. People are weary, but also, of course, in the last month or 6 weeks or so, we've seen the rollout of vaccines starting in many countries. We've seen that the vaccines are being proven to be safe, and we're finding, as a result of all of that, that the intention to get the vaccine, which we'd seen a dip during the final period of last year, is now increasing, and quite a marked increase between December and January. And certainly at the current time, it feels the discourse is much more around supply and demand than it is around, for example, hesitancy about vaccines. So that's one of the big, I think, public opinion messages we're finding at the start of this new year. Other messages that we're finding, and we're now just finishing this section with a sense of where people feel the middle of January, using our Essentials survey, which has been tracking opinion and emerging behaviours every couple of weeks. What we're finding is very much this sense that we have a long road ahead of us. Whatever optimism we may have around the medium term, for the moment, 72% of us are saying 6 months or longer before things get back to normal. And our researchers describe this as an extended view of restricted living, which I find quite a strong message, really, and it's coming through very strongly when we're talking to our individual respondents on the ground. This sense, perhaps, that it's really hard for me to make concerted plans, if you like, for the future. I'm living for the day-to-day. And of course, we can understand that, and many of us, as we've got into the new year in our own lives, are living under new restrictions. This is an approach that we've been adopting for a number of months now. We've asked people to assess where they are personally in their own journey, and where people are personally in their own journey. 3/4 of us are in this zone of getting ready for new restrictions, reacting to the day-to-day restrictions, and adapting to the restrictions. And so very much a kind of, let's say, a place where we'd rather not be, but we are having to live there and having to do the best we can in that environment. And in that environment, we are starting to see, I would say, more concern about governments and government performance around the world in terms of how they're handling the crisis, and a strong sense in many countries that things are perhaps out of control. And it's the United States this month that heads the leaderboard in terms of having a sense that things in my country are out of control right now. But as you'll see from the chart, it is not just 1 or 2 countries. Many countries around the world now have this sense, perhaps, of uneasiness about, if you like, the current state of play in our country. In the US, in the wake of the inauguration, some of our polling is suggesting there may be a move towards, let's say, a more bipartisan environment coming. That's, of course, something that many of us will be watching, both from within and outside the US. But for the moment, as we look ahead to the year that's coming, we are finding some optimism that it's going to be a better year, but a lot of realism, as we saw in that What Worries the World study. Coronavirus is the show in town. We need to get through it. the evolving attitudes to the vaccines, I think, show that people are now starting to see that as one route out of the situation in which we find ourselves. But for the moment, that sense, when we look at the latest data from the middle of the month, perhaps we characterize it as some frustration, yes, some realism, and I think also some difficulty for us in knowing and feeling how much we can plan for the future, and that point about living from the day to day as opposed to making plans 3 or 6 months from now will be one we're going to be watching very closely in this series of webinars. So that's my quick update perhaps on where we are now. As Jennifer mentioned at the outset, we're very much in this session now going to try and look a little bit further into the distance, and I'll hand back to Jennifer to introduce the next section.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Simon, for this review of how people are feeling and what they're thinking around the world. I think we need to keep this very much in mind as we think about tomorrow, and that's where Sarah is going to take us. So I invite everyone for a fast forward, and Sarah, could you tell us a little bit more about what to expect?
Certainly. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning from London. I'm going to talk about a foresight project that we've been carrying out during 2020. The Ipsos futurists have been thinking, how do we get beyond COVID-19? How do we start to think about what the world might look like in the relatively near term, in the year 2025, just a few years and beyond? And how we've done it is to create stories of the near future. Simon explained very clearly, I think, how even on a personal level, it's hard for all of us to plan and to think what's going to happen. You know, will we be all right next year, the year after? What should we be planning for now? But one good way to do that is to think about narratives and stories of different futures that could occur. And then we can start to think about how we can adapt to those and what plans we can put in place. So we're going to share a vision of 2025. In this world, the world has started to move on from COVID-19, but we're not in a settled world. It's still going to be a world of continued change, and some of those changes will be quite important to adapt to and ride with. As a futurist in Ipsos, I think it's very important to be comfortable with uncertainty around the future. Rather than trying to do forecasting and predict exactly what's going to happen, I think it's important to have a broader look at foresight, to think about the complexities of the future. That great quote there from Margaret Heffernan, a great futurist in the UK, talking about how cause and effect are not simple, how complexity happens when different events interact with one another. And this is another reason why storytelling and narratives are really important to help us think about the future. So we have created these 4 stories of the future. One of them is a core story that we think is the most likely to happen, but the other 3 are important as well. And how we did this was, we didn't just sit and make it up. We conducted a fairly thorough literature review. We workshopped a lot of the drivers of change and identified what we think are the things that are certain and definitely going to happen, and which things are the big uncertainties and how the world might respond to those uncertainties. We analysed it together, and we built our core pathway to the future and our 3 alternatives as well. And crucially, those 3 alternatives are important as well as the core pathway. So before I talk about what our core scenario is, I wanted to share some of the things that we think are pretty certain, some of the things we can rely on progressing, the trends that will keep going to 2025 and beyond. And you can see there we've divided it into planet, technology, people and systems. Those are very broad clusters. Some of them will be very familiar to us. If you look on the planet side, you know, the climate emergency, the pressures of climate change and the global climate emergency on our world, that's not going away. That's going to carry on. And if anything, events will become more intense in terms of their effects, more high impact and more frequent as well. So that will happen more in the world, I think, up to 2025. Other areas of this map show how COVID has pushed forward some trends that were happening already. So, for example, in the technology space, we can see AI and automation is obviously a massive global trend which impacts industry and our daily lives in lots of different ways. But the remote working that we've seen much more of, that we're all doing right now as I sit in my top bedroom at home, we see this carrying on. Maybe I will be in the office next time I speak with you, or maybe I'll be working in a blended way. And we think that that will probably carry on right up to 2025 and beyond. And that will change the shape of some of our businesses and our working practices. And similarly, if we look at the systems area of this map, we can see that the health systems resilience and trying to look at how resilience works is going to be one of the certainties. But the big uncertainties really are how the world will respond to these. So these are the things which we know are going to happen, but what will the world do? And the two big dimensions I think here are, will we have a rapid economic recovery that is swift and smooth, or will we have a patchy one that will give us some really clear different futures? And then the other axis here that we've put on is a more perhaps values driven axis. Will the world return to kind of using the power structures that we already have in order to create change and to create stability and to support us and create global growth? Or will there be a new approach? Simon said in his presentation that lots of people think the world is not going to go in a good direction. Will that uncertainty, will that concern push us towards new systemic changes? And so that's our model of the uncertainties. And on this map, we can then see there's a pathway in every quadrant here. We have a transforming world where there's lots of money and a new approach. We have a fractured power world where there's not much money and tensions between a new and an old approach. We have a world which we've called local power, where the thinking is a lot more kind of parochial and regional and polarized. And then we have this world, we've called it familiar power, and this is the one that we think is the most likely to 2025. The familiar power world is really interesting because it looks like 2019 on the surface, but underneath there's a lot of change going on. We're less resilient, we've got more debt, perhaps the debts from COVID have been underwritten by central banks. We don't have such strong global collaboration because we haven't really used COVID to leverage our global institutions. We've sort of left them as they are. There is economic growth, so the standards of living on a global scale will keep improving, the middle classes will keep kind of increasing, but we haven't addressed those problems like climate change, like systemic inequality, and so there is fractures under the surface. And I won't go through all of these different elements of the world, and there's a lot of data that we have that you can read about in our report, which is coming out very shortly in the next few weeks, so look out for that. But just to pick up on a couple of these, there will still be a real focus on venture capital in science to think of new ways of doing things and new ways of boosting technology. There will be values that clash, particularly between the generations, across this idea of how we need to improve and change the world. And there'll be lots of opportunities for brands as well to deal with some of the disruptions we might see to the supply chain, and also some of the technological opportunities we will have through greater personalization, greater use of data, that kind of thing. So that's the familiar power world. We have a lot on that. That core narrative, though, is not the whole story. I think we need to start thinking about the other three worlds as well, potentially because if we look beyond 2025, these three pictures may look closer to the world of 2030, perhaps. And there'll be different opportunities and different challenges in each one. And that's a really whistle-stop tour through the core scenario and a little taster of the other three. And I just want to leave you with the thought that, it may seem challenging to plan for different futures, and it may seem difficult to do because, we like to make our plan and carry it out. But I think living in the world of these four alternative futures for a little while is quite important strategically for us as organisations, for businesses, for governments and for individuals, because it helps us see beyond the difficulties of the present, and then as these futures emerge we will recognise them as they emerge, and we will be able to pivot and use different strategies to adapt to them. So that's where I think we should be working towards. And I just wanted to leave on a fairly optimistic point that each of us here, every one of us on this webinar, does have the power to influence the future. the decisions that we make day by day in our own jobs will help us turn the world in the direction that we want to see. And so understanding uncertainty and knowing what to do when we see divergent paths, that helps us to thrive within it. So on that note, I will hand back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really fascinating, and I love that message of responsibility that you gave at the end. Right? It's we all have a part in what's going to happen and in shaping this. And I guess that many of the people that are working in businesses around the world and that are attending this webinar today, I think are planning in their own realities, thinking about alternative scenarios. I think there's a lot of that going on in many companies. So I wonder if you had any sort of specific piece of advice for our friends on the call that are in that sort of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. I've heard that as well, Jen, that lots of people are starting to come up either with their own scenarios or to draw from a lot of the work that's out there thinking about the future. I think it's important to separate the noise and the signal. So it's interesting to think about what will the world look like, but we need to focus in on which parts are going to be most crucial for our own organizations, and what should we monitor now to see what's going to happen. So it may be fascinating to see what's happening with the global economy, but actually if there's only one part of it that's relevant for our own sector, that's the part we should be monitoring now. And I think getting ready internally and becoming culturally comfortable with talking about alternative realities is quite important. And also reflecting on the fact that we can deal with uncertainty and with change. I'm sure every one of us individually has dealt with a lot of change in the last few months, more than perhaps we thought we could. And so it's quite an optimistic time that we can flex to adapt to different worlds. Great advice. So focus and agility at the same time. I would summarize your words. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sarah. So now, from the sort of broad foresight conversation, we're going to zoom into a very specific story. And I'm very happy to hand over to Pallavi, who's going to lead us into discovering the opportunities of rural India. Pallavi, the floor is yours. We can't hear you. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about the changes that have been happening in rural India. These changes have been happening for the past few years, but really it's the COVID times, the last year, that has brought to fore the stark bounce back that the rural markets have given to us. And I'll take you through the 5 consumer truths. But before that, just to tell you the kind of potential rural India holds. Bharat is the term we use for rural India. Well, the figure is as high as $200 billion US. It's a really large market that is to be tapped. And just to give you an idea, it's about 70% the size of the economy of Singapore or Malaysia. So it's a big opportunity. So let's get to the consumer truths. The first one, when you think of rural India, don't just think of agriculture and everyone involved only in agriculture. In fact, it's only 23% of the contribution that comes through agriculture, which is cultivation and livestock farming. The other sectors are manufacturing, construction, retail, and it's really spread out in rural India. And more so, what is happening is that there are a lot of different family members who are now bringing in income. Earlier, it used to be just the man who would go out to work, but now the women are stepping out too, where they can, and where they can't, they're contributing from home. It's also the youth who are taking up jobs and contributing to the family income. So the income is increasing, and this is really helping to expand the core. What do I mean by the core? The core of the expenses of the household in rural India are not meager as we would think. There are a lot of new aspirations that have come in there and a lot of new categories that have entered. To take an example, smartphones are in the aspiration of every youth, and if they don't already have one, they will get one soon. So are bikes, motorbikes. They all want one. And for the women, it's a lot about household appliances to make their work easier, looking for convenience, and so on. So a lot of changes in the core itself. And this is led by the youth who are a lot more exposed, they are on digital, they know about a lot of things. The women, like I said, who really want to contribute to the household income and, make a space for themselves, get some respect from the family members. The biggest phenomenon last year was on reverse migration. A lot of village folks had moved to the cities, and for the past many years, they've been working in cities and sending monies back home. But due to the lockdown, they were forced to move back to their villages. And what they took back with them were the brands that they are now used to, the experiences that they now want. And because of all this, the rural consumption landscape has really seen a big change. The third one, well, India is known to be a collective culture, and it is more so in rural India. But what is now happening is that the older people who held all the authority are now slowly accepting that the youngsters who are digitally savvy, who have a lot more information, have a lot more knowledge, can also help in decision making. So as long as the collective codes or the authority is not challenged, the decisions are now being led by the youngsters. And this could be education, where somebody goes to school or college, what kind of new practices to bring into agriculture, household purchases, and so on. What is this doing to how the consumers perceive value? India is also known to be a value for money kind of country. And in the rural areas, value is very clearly seen from actually the product benefit and delivery. The consumers want to see the benefit out there, clear, simple. Unlike the urban markets, which have a lot of laddered emotional territories in their advertising and their claims, the rural consumer really wants to see the tangible and the functional a lot more. For example, they don't really look at the fragrance of a detergent or something else, but they would like to know how well it cleans the clothes. Yeah, there's also price point sensitivity because the products are available at a lower price point. So for any brand which is either trying to gain share or introduce new products, that is something that they have to adhere to. And in addition to the price point, they really need to make sure that the product benefit is delivered. There's also increasing availability of brands and products throughout rural India. Till a few years back, the villagers in the small villages had to travel to cities and towns to purchase these products. But now, more or less, in their villages or nearby villages, they get a whole lot of products, and hence their choice set has also increased. Just a word about local brands. In India, there are a lot of local brands in some categories, lots more like foods, like detergents. Every few 100 kilometers, the local brand would change. And there's a lot of implicit trust the rural consumers have on these brands because they've grown up with these. They feel that these cater to their own sensibilities. And also, like their choices, preferences, especially like flavor in foods and so on. E-commerce is also available, maybe not down to the last village, but a lot more. And everyone has their phone, so they know what is available. And if they don't have it nearby, they can arrange to order it somewhere close by and go and receive the product. So it opens up a lot of doors as well. Underlying all of this is the digital revolution. I mentioned smartphones. Internet is either free or very cheap, so everyone has it. And really, the vernacular is the new revolution that is sweeping the land. English is the language of status, of progress. If you want to work, that is where English rules. But everything else is vernacular, and people they choose to watch entertainment in vernacular, to chat, to joke, everything is in the vernacular. In fact, if you open the Google search page, it offers 9 other Indian languages apart from English. That's how popular it is. Voice and video are really expanding the market because they've removed the hurdle of literacy and of texting. So people couldn't text or read properly because they were not literate enough. But now there is no such hurdle. So this is a summary of all the 5 truths that we wanted to highlight, and just briefly on the implications for anyone wanting to look at rural India more closely. It's truly a mini culture that needs to be understood. And what I mean by that is that a lot of marketeers and researchers have spent a lot of time in the urban markets, but not so in rural. And so if you want to understand what a housewife in a rural household feels, you talk to her, possibly talk to her family, different generations, and even beyond that, maybe some key opinion leaders, a school teacher, a health worker, the village head, to really understand and contextualize their behaviors and their consumption patterns. The second one would be rural first thinking. The benefits that they seek are different from the urban markets. Again, just to take an example, for a detergent which says it cleans really well in one go and white, these people are not really looking for that, because they might think it's very harsh, and it will lead to their clothes lives getting cut down, and that's not in their interest. So really it is rural first that they need to if you look at rural first, you'll be able to make products and which are closer to their needs and benefits. And the last one is India is vast, and you really need to look at, we recommend that you look at a lot of different variables like population of the village, the levels of progress, because each area and each region is quite different, how far the village is from the highway, and so on and so forth, and really redesign for rural. And that's it from me. With that, I hand over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Pallavi. I'd like to thank you very much for contributing to make our cultural understanding of the world much better today, because it's really, I think those examples that you gave were so specific and so important in terms of how some things can work or won't work at all. And if you don't know, and you don't know how to read these cultural details, you're lost, right? So very, very interesting and huge opportunities. Also very interesting to see how technology has an important role in transformation. Very interesting even. So one thing I wanted to ask you, Pallavi, is that I noticed you mentioned women a lot, which was very interesting, and there were also some very nice, lovely pictures of Indian women there. We'll expand a little bit on this. How should people be thinking about these women in rural India, and how should they be connecting with these more? What would your advice be on that?
Oh yes, I would say that the women have progressed quite a bit. It really varies in India. There are some states which are less progressive, but the progress is quite there to see. And in fact, as women contribute more and earn the respect, as I mentioned, they are becoming part of the decision making, which earlier they weren't in the household. So marketers and brands really need to speak to the woman, because she is thinking a lot more about what is needed in the household, and she is a part of the decision making as well.
And Pallavi, I had just to follow up on that question. Sarah, let's say, showed us the pathways to 2025. If you were helping us understand what may happen next in rural India, to build on your analysis, what were the biggest changes you think we might see if we fast forward to 2025?
Yeah, well, we expect a lot more of the rural population to be online on their mobiles. I've mentioned already that the smartphone penetration is increasing a lot, and that is really the basis of all the revolution that we are seeing, because of connectivity, accessibility, and further on, all systems, supply chains, the point of sale. There are a lot of startups in that area already connecting the rural markets, and that will help move the markets along quite a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot for that deep dive. And now we will move over to Rich. Very happy to have you with us, Rich, and to understand, to have a little glimpse of how artificial intelligence can help everyone on this journey to make sense of what's going on, understand how different sources of data can work together, what are the smartest ways to do things. So over to you, Rich. We can see your screen.
Great. Okay. Good morning, good day, good evening, everyone. As the previous presentations highlighted, we know that AI is having a dramatic impact on our world, and the 2025 trends that Sarah shared show that this is not changing. Advances in computing power, data availability continue to create new paths to leverage AI that are changing everything about our world: how we grow food, how we transport it, how we sell it, how we engage with our customers, how we engage with each other, and so much more. And as Pallavi's discussion showed, this is now touching everyone in rural as well as urban areas and all across the globe. The question is, how is this affecting our industry and informing our decision making? So first, getting a little clarity is helpful, because data science and AI are terms that are used to describe really diverse areas. So data science includes those methods that combine the fields of computer science and statistics. But to actually really get value out of these methods requires domain and business knowledge to appropriately understand and leverage the data being modeled as well. So now, artificial intelligence is not a new field. So although its impact has exploded in recent years due to the advances in the computational power and the data availability that I've already mentioned, the discipline's been around for over 60 years. And actually, 25 years ago, I was writing about confusion around AI and machine learning. And at that time, the issues were driven by the diversity of different methods, the different goals for the different methods and approaches. And those are the same issues that are continuing to create confusion today. So now, though, we're primarily focused on applying intelligent algorithms to solve practical problems. And that's how we'll talk about it in the next few minutes. So, but beyond the diversity of the methods and goals, some of the confusion comes from those who are profiting from hype and the ambiguity in the field. So in recent years, there have been studies showing substantial numbers of supposed AI companies that really don't leverage the approaches in any meaningful way in their business. And that said, while the methods are really becoming far more common, we do still need to focus on the true value being added. So one of the really key advances for market research, for understanding people, markets, societies, is the expansion of the ecosystem of data that we can bring to help inform our decision making. So different types of data provide distinct insights to solve practical questions, but we need to remember that each of these has their own pros and cons. But it's the data science and AI methods that are now making more of this full ecosystem of data available to help us. So one of the key pillars is the ability to extract systematic value from all of the data, including unstructured data. So this isn't just images, video, audio, but now sensor data, wearable data, mobility data. All of this information, some of it digital exhaust, things that we don't think of as useful, can help provide more insights. Another pillar of the value add is the ability to integrate these different data streams to obtain new and deeper insights. But one thing I don't want everybody to forget is that these new algorithmic advances can be leveraged with traditional market research data as well to gain new insights around the whys of behavior, as well as some of the cause and effect questions that Sarah mentioned earlier. So moving from data and analytics, as we said, we're focused on the application of data science and AI to solve practical problems. So from a business perspective, AI and learning methods can be useful for automating processes to make them more efficient and faster. We're all familiar with digital assistants and the ability of technology to directly engage with us or to facilitate engagements creates new opportunities for collecting new information, as well as for how we serve our stakeholders and our customers. And finally, extracting knowledge from the unstructured data, modeling data in new ways, in isolation and integrated together, creates paths for new insights that help us inform, revise, and alter our decisions. So given the time, I'll just provide a couple of quick examples, one of each, to put this in perspective. Because first, even in the insights area, we shouldn't undervalue advances in process automation. In recent work at Ipsos, we've leveraged natural language processing, examining over 90,000 separate surveys, over 250,000 questions, to create a platform that is a recommender AI engine to recommend the optimal wording for questions and answers in the Ipsos question library. In engagement, leveraging AI for smart probing of people's comments allows us in an automated platform, to go beyond simplistic, tell me more, to probe deeply in a natural way to gain really specific, detailed information around topics, such as the probing around the quality issues of one's car. And finally, there are many, many areas of AI and data science bringing new insights. The images here from the warehouse explosion last year in Beirut. In that case, we had social media data within 2 hours of the request, satellite imagery within 4 hours, drone and anonymized cell phone data within a day, and field survey and facility interviews within 2 days. In that case, the Ipsos work, the synthesis of the data, helped inform rescue efforts based on occupancy of buildings and other local logistics. But beyond crisis risk examples, as most of us on the phone, these same approaches are useful for understanding people's behavior. And we're leveraging them everything from how people's behavior is changing in COVID times, as well as examining multiple data streams around areas such as elections for the richer, deeper insights. So while new sources of data, AI techniques are creating a lot of new opportunities, traditional questions of data quality and relevance are more important than they were in the past. If your data isn't representative, past biases can become formalized as part of the solution. As big data sources are being leveraged for different uses than they were originally created. And that's one of the strengths we've got with data science. But this raises questions about the quality and the measurement of those, because it affects accuracy, unintended consequences, and potentially creates ethical issues. And Pallavi's presentation touched on how such reinforcement of old patterns could stifle some advances. So as we continue to see changes in behavior due to COVID, this reminds us models trained on data that's no longer relevant can be misleading. So combining human intelligence to build, train, update, interpret, and leverage the insights of AI, this is critical to ensure it's accurate, used ethically, and to really leverage the potential that the data and methods offer. And this is key as we think about the people, systems, planet domains in the 2025 trends that Sarah mentioned, because this data and technology is not only one of those trends, it is going to be one of the sources of informing and providing solutions for those areas. So I'm optimistic about where our industry is going. Leveraging these tools will be even more relevant in 2025 than we are today. So thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Rich. And I think that many businesses are wondering how they should use AI. There are lots of questions, more questions than answers today, lots of experimenting. I was wondering if you could share just a very quick word of advice for these businesses in this situation.
Actually, the interesting thing is I would probably start thinking more about the data ecosystem, because many of the businesses have different sources of data and there's data across the company. So not only thinking about the traditional sources, but what information is captured by finance systems, by the customer service and the others, because we now have the ability to mine all of those to bring them together to serve customers better. And that helps us with current customers, but looking at new outside sources on how we can acquire new ones and serve them better as well.
Great. Good. So very practical advice. Thank you very much for that. Thanks to all our speakers and to all of you who have been with us. And we look forward to seeing you again next month on our next Keys webinar. Bye-bye, everyone.